Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is my Jeep Liberty and today I'm excited to show how I transformed it into a sick off-roading machine. All for 6,000 Canadian. That's right, 6K. Over the course of this video, I'll take you through everything I did, from the mechanical work to cosmetic upgrades to make sure this Jeep was ready to hit the trails. But before we dive into the modifications, let's start with a quick backstory. It all started when I was scrolling through Kijiji, and one evening I stumbled upon this 2003 Jeep Liberty for only $2,000. Now, this $2,000 definitely caught my attention. I thought it was worth checking out. The listing mentioned a few issues, but nothing that sounded like a deal breaker. It had 4-wheel drive, the engine seemed pretty good, and despite the neglected maintenance, the Jeep seemed pretty solid with only 200,000 kilometers on the odometer. So I looked at the comparison Jeeps and they were being sold for about 6,000 to 8,000 in similar condition and similar kilometers. So I decided to go take a look. When I was there, I found some problems. Nothing major, but definitely things that would need attention. The body had some damage, especially around the bumpers. There was a few rust spots. None of these were a deal breaker for me. The most significant issue was the rust holes on the rocker panels, some surface rust on top, and the damage I found near the rear of the taillight. I also noticed the gas cap was broken, the rear bumper was bent, the front bumper was cracked, but the mechanical side of things seemed fine. The engine wasn't overheating, it started up just fine off the first crank, and the transmission shifted super smooth and had clean fluid. Another issue with the Jeep was that the tailgate latch wouldn't work, so that was pretty annoying to have to deal with later. The other thing that stood out to me was how dirty the interior was. It has that typical old car smell mixed with a bit of dirt, and the seats and carpets were covered in grime. But again, it wasn't something that couldn't be fixed. After a thorough inspection, I noticed a couple of check engine lights, so I decided to scan the codes. Some were related to maintenance issues like worn out sensors, but nothing serious. So I went ahead and made him an offer of $1,500, and the seller accepted. I had my new project ready and I drove it home. The first thing I did was to get cleaning the interior. The interior was disgusting. I've done auto detailing for a few years, so I knew exactly what I needed to do. I stripped out all the seats and carpets, shampooed everything, vacuumed every nook and cranny, and I also cleaned the headliner and gave the interior plastics a good steam and wipe. The whole Jeep had a weird smell, kind of like a mix of mildew and old car funk. But after a deep clean, it was starting to feel a lot better. I even shampooed the seats twice because they were in such bad shape. I also vacuumed the crap out of everything, removing the seats, shampooed the carpets, and made everything look absolutely brand new. And here's just a quick time lapse of me vacuuming and shampooing all the seats and carpets. Here's all the gunk and dirty water I sucked out of the carpets and seats. Once the Jeep was clean and everything was detailed, I moved on to the more important repairs. The rear door latch wasn't working properly, so I ordered a new latch mechanism off Amazon. It wasn't a hard fix, just swapped out the old one and now the door opens and closes perfectly. With that done, I turned my attention to the brakes. The pads and rotors were in rough shape and worn and warped, so I decided to replace them completely. I did both the front and the rear brakes along with the rotors. After getting everything replaced, I was happy to find that the Jeep stopped on a dime without any issues. Now with the basics taken care of, it was time to tackle the engine. I noticed the valve cover was smoking after running for a while, which is a common issue with these older Jeeps. So I ordered some new valve cover gaskets and swapped them out. While I was in there, I also took the opportunity to swap out the exhaust manifold gaskets, because I did hear a tick on cold starts. And then I replaced the AC condenser, the water pump, the thermostat, and the power steering. These were all pretty beat up, and since one of the weaker points of the Jeep's engine is the tendency to overheat, I figured it was better to do some preventative maintenance. I also replaced the power steering pump, which was so gummed up I didn't even know how it worked in the first place. I replaced the power steering pulley because it had a bit of play in it as well. Once that was done, with the engine already being apart, I also replaced the fuel injectors, coil packs, and spark plugs, assuming they never have been done. Then I swapped out the serpentine belt while I was in there. This Jeep has a timing chain, so I didn't have to mess with that, but everything else was fair game. I also replaced the power steering lines, cleaned out the transmission cooler, and replaced the old crusty transmission lines. Once I had everything buttoned up, I topped up all the fluids, engine oil, power steering fluid, and coolant, and started it up. Everything ran smooth, no leaks, no overheating. I was happy with the progress. And after scanning all the codes again, all the lights went away, which was a relief. Now I can move on to the next part. Next, I turned my attention to the bodywork. The biggest issue was the rust on the rocker panels, which seriously needed some attention if I wanted this Jeep to have a long life on the trails. I decided to cut out the rusty sections and weld in new rocker panels that I ordered off eBay. The first step was to cut the old rocker panels entirely and remove as much rust as possible. Then I dry fit and trimmed the new panels to get them aligned perfectly. Once they fit just right, I got to work on the remaining exposed metal. I completely wire brushed and cleaned the inside of the rocker panels, removing any leftover rust. Then I applied rust converter and rust inhibitor to the exposed metal, which should keep new rust from forming down the line. With the prep work done, I started welding. Using a spot weld method, I initially secured the panels with some self-tapping screws to hold everything in place. Once the welding was complete, I grinded down all the welds to smooth everything out and give it a cleaner look. After some final cleanup, the rocker panels were solid and I was ready for the next step. Next, I tackled the drivetrain fluids. I drained and replaced all the fluids in the differentials and transfer cases. When I got to the rear differential, I opened it up and I was super excited to find that my Jeep came with the Chrysler 8.25 diff, not the Dana 35. And even better, it came with the factory installed limited slip differential. This was a great bonus as these limited slips came on the Liberties that weren't equipped with ABS or traction control, just like mine. I made sure to add the correct limited slip additive to keep the limited slip functioning smoothly, and once everything was sealed up and good to go, I moved on to my next task. Now for off-roading, I wanted some underbody protection and some recovery points, so what did I do? I went on a quick hunt to my local junkyard in search of some skid plates and front tow hooks, and I hit an absolute gold mine. Out of the 4 Liberties there, 2 of them were Renegades, which means they had the front, the transfer case, and the fuel tank skid plates, as well as the front tow hooks. I also took off a gas cap to replace mine, and a new front bumper. This all cost me $200. In comparison, all the skid plates and tow hooks aftermarket for the KJ would be a total of $1,800 Canadian before shipping, which is about $1,300 American. So yeah, I was pretty glad I came across all this in the first junkyard I looked. That saved me a lot of time and a lot of money. Now for the fun part, lifting the Jeep. I wanted to give it a solid boost for off-road capability, so I ordered a set of Old Man Emu medium load extended front coils, which gave me about 2.5 inches of ground clearance. For the shocks, I went with Rancho RS 5000X shocks all around. For the front, I used the standard Rancho shocks made for the Liberty since the shock length is the same for even the extended coils. But for the rear, I went with the Rancho shocks from a 2004-9 Dodge Durango, which gave me more articulation, and I would assume they can handle a heavier load, which is good for off-roading and overlanding, especially if you want to fit a rooftop tent or extra weight. Next, it was time for the upper control arms. The popular ones to get were the JBA ones, but they were way too pricey for me, around $500 to $600. So I decided to go with these D-Key upper control arms off Amazon. They look about the same, and they are a lot cheaper. They provide the right angle with the good ball joint, good reviews, good bushings, and they've been perfect so far. I definitely recommend these. They're a third of the price and an awesome value. Installing the new coils and shocks was relatively straightforward, but as I went along, I decided to replace all the suspension components, including the lower ball joints and the bushings. Since I was lifting the Jeep, I wanted to make sure everything was up to spec and wouldn't wear out, especially those lower ball joints that seem to break on people and leave them stranded. For the rear springs, I chose the Skyjacker 2.5 inch lift. These are especially made for the Liberty and super easy to install. They just slip right in and it's a 10-minute job. These were a bit cheaper than the Old Man Emu ones, and I couldn't find any to ship quickly, so I went with these Skyjacker ones, and I'm super happy with them. They look great, they lift it perfectly, and they're relatively soft. Now with the suspension looking awesome, all matching that red theme, it was time to move on to the tires. After careful consideration, I went with a set of MotoMaster Eliminator X-Trail all-terrain tires in the E-Load rating. These are the 245/75 R16 size, which is an inch bigger than the stock tires. These tires are aggressive off-road but claim to be great in the winter, which is something I really wanted since I plan on using them in harsh Canadian winters. And I wanted the compound to stay soft even in really cold weather. These claim they're designed specifically for winter conditions to stay soft. I haven't tested them yet, so let's hope they don't disappoint. Once I got them mounted and balanced, I also painted the rims by coating them in Plasti-Dip. It's a cheap way to make the old rims look brand new again, because it evens out all the imperfections, and if I ever wanted to change it, I could just peel it off. So I let them dry, and once they were dry, I was super happy with the way they turned out. They almost look brand new. With the lift in place and the bigger tires, the Jeep gained 3 inches of lift all around, which was perfect, exactly what I was hoping for. To clear the bigger tires, I installed some 1.5 inch wheel spacers. These helped with the rubbing on the sway bars when I was fully cranked, giving them more space. It also gave me more space between the tire and the control arm, which was really close. The only issue left was rubbing on this part of the wheel well, but after a little trimming of the body and molding of the wheel liner, I took care of it. I still rub a tiny bit in the wheel wells at certain angles, but not enough that it'll cause any kind of problems. At this point, the Jeep was looking good, but I still had a few things to take care of, like the headlights. The stock headlights weren't cutting it, so I decided to do a retrofit projector headlight swap. Stripped the reflective material in the headlight with oven cleaner. Then I painted the insides of the headlight black, which adds a nice touch. Once I had them all done, I leveled them out, and they made the Jeep look so much newer and more modern. It provides much better lighting at night, with these Wrangler style headlights. Up next was the stereo. The old Jeep radio had to go, so I bought the Chrysler single DIN frame and mount kit off Amazon. That also came with wiring connectors and plug adapters. Just match and crimp the wires together, install it, and you're good to go. I swapped the old one for this Alpine stereo, which was $170 on Amazon. This was a great upgrade because not only did it add Bluetooth, it also made the actual speakers in the Jeep sound so much better and more clear. I was actually debating on swapping out the speakers because they sounded so bad before, but now they actually sound a lot better and the stereo looks so much better too. Now before I can even think of painting, I had to get rid of this rust by the brake light and the roof rail. I wire brushed all the rust away, and then I filled and molded the area with some fiberglass reinforced body filler, which is unbreakable. Once that was done, I applied a coat of primer to make it easier for the paint to stick. Next step was to prep the car for painting with the Raptor liner coating. The first thing I had to do was sand down the whole vehicle and scuff up all the clear coat with 80 to 160 grit sandpaper. And I just had to sand the whole thing down to get all the shine off. This was a long and painful process, but I wanted it done properly. Once that was done, I masked everything off I didn't want painted. With the masking done, before starting to paint, I wiped all the body panels down with isopropyl alcohol to clean the surfaces. Now that the Jeep was prepped, I was ready to start painting. The paint color I ended up going with was the factory Toyota Desert Sand color. Once I had the tintable bottles of Raptor liner, I mixed in a bottle of the color, shook it up, and then put in the hardener, shook it up again, and it was ready to spray. I used up 6 bottles to paint the Jeep, but if I were to do it again, I would go with 8 bottles to get a thicker coat, especially if you're painting a vehicle that has a brighter color like red for example. However, 6 is all I had and it was perfectly fine. I still love the way it turned out, and after spraying the entire thing down with 2 coats using up 3 bottles per coat, I was super happy with the results. Once I was done painting, I waited 20 minutes for the paint to set and then had to peel everything off within the hour so that the paint doesn't harden and become impossible to take off the masking tape. And once that was done, this is how it turned out. The next day, I separately painted the front bumper and grille with this rattle can liner coating. It turned out a bit smoother, but I think the difference in textures improves the look even more. I also painted the rear bumper with the same stuff, and I think it turned out absolutely perfect, giving it a nice contrast, breaking up a bit of that sand color in the back and front. Up next, I used this polyurethane sealer to seal off all the edges on the new rocker panels. This sealer I bought from the paint store and is designed specifically for automotive purposes and to get painted. Once that was dry, I painted the top of the rocker panels to the original Jeep color to match the door wells, which looks perfect, and it looks like the original rocker panels, especially once I put the plastic liner on. I also cut and put in some new floor mats that turned out great. The old ones were super dirty in fabric and these ones look so much better. Fit the bumper, and I also tinted out the turn signals. I put LED fog lights in, and then I put on the grille. This is the finished product of the Jeep. I let it sit for 6 days so that the Raptor liner reaches its full hardness, and I think it looks absolutely sick. I hope you got some useful information from this video, and I look forward to taking this thing on some trails and camping trips and testing it off-road, so stay tuned. If you have any questions, comment below and I will answer the best I can. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more. I'll see you guys later.